one of my favorite roguelike deck builders just got a sequel. I absolutely adore Monster Train 2, and what a better way to celebrate its inception than by doing a challenge run. So I'm here today to answer the question, can you beat Monster Train 2 using only the starter deck? Now, before we get into the run itself, I have to set some rules so we can understand how the challenge is going to work. If you don't care about the rules and you just want to see the run, you can skip to this timestamp. Bear with me as I've taken some minor liberties with the rules in order to create a better viewer experience. Number 1, I can't add any cards to my deck from any source, including units, spells, rooms, and equipment cards. Number 2, I am allowed to play on Covenant 1. Covenant 1 lets me start with 5 random extra cards in exchange for stronger enemies. The starter cards will always be 2 sets of 2 common cards and an uncommon unit. I am allowed to re-roll the random starting cards. Number 3, upgrades, artifacts, and card modifiers are permitted. Pretty straightforward. Number 4, and most controversially, I am allowed to add Scourges and Blight cards to the deck, since they aren't directly adding a card that I benefit from in some way. I think this rule will lead to more interesting possibilities and outcomes, but let me know if you disagree with this one. Anyway, with the rules out of the way, let's jump right into it. One of the first choices I have to make is which clans I want to use. Luckily, I have a plan. We'll go Banished for our primary clan, with Pyreborn as our secondary clan, and Fel as our champion. This is also interesting from a flavor perspective because these are the clans you start with. Another important decision is which Pyre Heart to use. Unfortunately, I only have 4. We'll go with Winged Spirit, which will allow me to restore the front friendly units to full HP once per battle. Now we can depart. I mentioned I had a plan. Well, the plan really only extends to these random starting cards. Beyond that, I'm shooting from the hip. I will be re-rolling these starting cards until I hit 2 copies of Divinity. This card on its own is really nothing special, 10 Valor for 3 mana. But when I get some upgrades on it, it'll go from 0 to hero, and we can use it to super buff our Fel. After some re-rolling, I got the Divinity hit I was looking for. I also got some Pyre Casks and a Guildmonger. These are somewhat irrelevant, but everything helps when you have so little. The start of a run is always a choice of random artifact and a random champion upgrade. I'm going to upgrade first to find some potential direction for the run. The choices on offer for Vel are Vanguardian and Unchained. I thought about taking Unchained at first. After all, permanent buffs on my Fel is really nice for a challenge like this, and the starter deck does have some ways to move her around in order to trigger the effect. Vanguardian is nice because it opens up potential strategies like stacking a floor and buffing it with Valor. Ultimately, I decided on Vanguardian because micromanaging Unchained was going to be a lot harder with the starter deck, and Vanguardian starts off with a slightly beefier body. The artifacts on offer were Purified Soul Shard and Martyr's Signet. I suppose I should mention that I've only played a handful of runs, so my potential pool of rewards is a lot smaller. This could either work against me or for me. I haven't quite played the game enough to be sure. These artifacts are both pretty bad, but I'll take Martyr's Signet since it actually does something. The first trial is fairly easy, and I'm absolutely going to need as much money as possible, so let's toggle it on. The strategy for this fight is simple. We'll play Fel on floor 1 and a Guildmonger behind her. The other floors will be stewards. Throughout the fight, we'll buff Fel with Valor cards so that she's strong enough to take out the wave boss. Other than that, there's not much to note about the first fight. It's really easy. Fel gets down to 35 damage times 2 and 29 armor, which is more than sufficient to murder the boss. We skip our card rewards and enter Ring 2, which contains a unit banner we can't take and a choice between a Merchant of Magic and a Merchant of Steel. Going right to the Merchant of Magic here was a no-brainer for me since we had to get these Divinity cards juiced up. Holdover immediately catches my eye. If there's any hope of beating this challenge, I need to be able to stack as much Valor as possible, and Holdover is going to be a key component of that. We'll slap it on one of our Divinities. We'll also make a Fire Starter Consume since we don't really want too many of these in the deck. After re-rolling the shop, I thought about putting Intrinsic on the other Divinity. In hindsight, the double stack might have been better, but getting both Divinities to be 2 energy was also an important milestone to meet to have them both be playable on the same turn. However, I weighed my future options and I decided to pick neither in the hopes that I'd get something better further down the line. Let's make the holdover Divinity cost 1 less and put 10 magic power on a fire starter. It'll make getting rid of those backline stragglers a lot easier. I also removed a shield steward. The Ring 2 trial was 1 less energy per turn. I opted into it because I had just made my Divinities cheaper, but this will end up being quite painful. Again, we're playing Fel and Guildmonger on the first floor. Here's why only having 2 energy in this fight is really painful. I need to play Divinity as much as possible on Fel, but the backline fairy is giving the enemies haste, which lets them skip the second floor. My Pyre is going to take a pummeling here. On the second turn, I was able to give Fel enough Valor to kill at least the enemy frontliner. I had another problem. By the time the boss showed up, I didn't have enough Valor on Fel to kill him. Fortunately, I chunked him out enough that the stewards got him down to 10 HP, and I was able to finish him on the third floor with a Pyre Cask into a Fire Starter. I don't know why it wasn't occurring to me to play Fel Fel on the top floor. Ring 3 had a Merchant of Magic and a Merchant of Arms. I opted for the right path to the Merchant of Magic again. I needed more juice on the Divinity. The random event here was really interesting. I could buff a unit with Flight. Because Flight doesn't care about room capacity, I could cheat a Steward onto the floor with Fel and Guildmonger. So I'm going to slap it on a Shield Steward. At the shop, I did elect to put Intrinsic on Divinity this time, and I made another Fire Starter consume. Lastly, I removed a Fire Starter. Time for another fight. It's the first major boss, Archeon. He deals damage to my Pyre when I don't have a unit on his floor. That's going to be a problem. We start with the typical setup with the Shield Steward on the second floor. On turn 2, we fly him in so he can reap the benefits of Fel's Valor. Between units getting past my setup and the boss's effect, I was taking a lot of little chip Pyre damage. Eventually, I got my floor strong enough to take out most of the adds. By the time the boss came, I had only 27 life left on my Pyre, but I was more than strong enough to kill the boss. We skip all the card rewards as usual, and I get to choose my first enhancement. Energy was a no-brainer here, since I don't really care about draw, and I definitely don't care about capacity. Ring 4 offered a very interesting combination of goods. I could go left and scoop money and a trinket merchant and event, or I could go right for Pyre health and a Merchant of Steel. I opted to go left because even though I could use the Pyre health, all 3 choices on the left were very relevant. At the random event, I pretty much hit the jackpot. I could add this detrimental blight card to my deck that increases spell costs, but I could upgrade one of the divinities with triple stack. Remember that according to my rules, I can add blights and scourges as long as they aren't adding a useful card to my deck. Fel's upgrade was simply continuing down the Vanguardian path. At the trinket shop, this volatile gauge catches my eye right away. I had just put a blight card in my deck that increases the cost of my cards, but with this gauge, I could totally ignore its effects and draw 2 extra cards. Since my carry cards were heavy on energy cost anyway, I was happy to have them randomized. This was an insane set of upgrades to my deck, and I felt a lot more confident in my deck after this. Mark of Invasion is the easiest trial for us, and it's even desirable because it gives a bunch of Valor to Fel. I finally started playing Fel at the top floor to maximize the Valor gain. Now, when I draw my Super Juice triple stack Divinity, I could spam it on every turn to give Fel a whopping 30 Valor. The only real worrying thing about this fight was all the corruption stacks my champion was eating. She got down to 2 HP, but it looked scarier than it actually was because I'm gaining so much armor from Valor, and I also have a full heal available from my Pyre effect. Here's a demo of what I was talking about with the Entropic Crystals. They made my cards cost more, but these cards will be re-randomized on the redraw, effectively negating the effect of the blight. By the time the boss arrived, I was at a whopping 300 damage with Fel, which made short work of the boss. Ring 5 contained another interesting decision for me. I opted to go left into the Merchant of Steel because I wanted to dig for multi-strike on my units. With Vel buffing everyone's damage, multi-strike was going to be the most premium upgrade I could get. The other 2 nodes were unfortunately wasted, however I could get 10 gold off one of them. At the Merchant, I immediately opted into a reroll because there were no multi-strike. Unfortunately, the refresh didn't produce a multi-strike, but it did have another mildly interesting option. With Smidgestone, I could squeeze a Steward down to one slot and fit him in the main room with the others. It's not much, but everything helps. Other than that, this ring was pretty disappointing as I didn't get much stronger. Now's a great time to introduce you guys to the team that will potentially carry me to glory. First off, we have the Grand Champion Fel. You may recognize her from the first game as the lady who does a bunch of moaning sounds. She's our Valor generating engine for the rest of the floor. Then we have Gildus Mungerus. If he perishes, he shits out an egg that we can cook over easy. Next up is Shield Steward. He drank one too many Red Bulls and now he actually has wings. And lastly we have Jeff. Honestly, Jeff doesn't do much, but he helps. And these are the group of all-stars that are the backbone of this challenge run. Anyway, let's get back into the action. Battle 5 starts with Fel at the top and a Guildmonger behind. We want to play the Shield Steward on the second floor so we can fly him in after we place Jeff down. For some reason, Spear Stewards are not drawn on the deployment phase, only Shield Stewards are. I didn't draw Jeff until turn 3, but here I can showcase how I set up the room. We plop Jeff down behind Guildmonger, and then we fly in the Shield Steward. Let's make sure we kill this imp because we really need his gold. By the time the enemies got to the top floor, my Fel was so powerful that she easily cleared them out. There was no real trouble with the adds in this battle, so let's skip straight to the boss. The boss presented absolutely no real threat and was taken down with plenty of armor to spare. For Ring 6, I want to grab some health for my Pyre and a Merchant of Magic where I decked out the other divinity with Holdover. I also put double stack on a Just Cause I can. On to another major boss, Kyle. He gives his units spikes and health. Kyle started off on the top floor, which was nice because it meant I could do some chip damage to him right away. I wanted to prevent the enemy frontliners from eating as much as possible in this fight, so I'll do my best to take out these backliners. At this point, we're very familiar with the setup. We stack the top floor and get divinity on Fel right away. The most annoying thing were these discordant tolls being added to my deck because the cost was being randomized. I had to prioritize playing Divinity, so my Pyre was going to take some chip damage off these. A turn like this is the absolute dream. I can play both Divinities, both Scourges, and I can even play the double stack Just Cause. Thank you, Volatile Gauge. When Kyle arrived on my floor, he had 16 spikes, which meant that I was going to lose some units. But look at my absolute Chad of a champion with 400 damage and armor. She makes light work of this fight. For the reward, we'll go with another energy upgrade following the same logic as last time. We just want as many cards to be playable as possible. And what the hell, we're nearing the end, so let's loot this 25 gold off the eggs. Ring 7 presented another upgrade for Fel and a Merchant of Steel, where I whiffed on multi-strike yet again. We'll just remove a card and keep it pushing. The trial in this battle was an easy take. -1 energy when we had 2 energy upgrades for a whopping 400 gold. The main problem in this fight was just how beefy the frontline units were, and behind them were sweeping attackers, which is fine for most of my units, but Jeff is frail and can't take much of a beating. I also had to contend with these units that dealt 5 damage to my Pyre on an empty floor. When the first enemy unit got up to the 3rd floor, I didn't yet have enough Valor on my Fel to take him out, so I guess I'm eating 8 damage. One more round of Valor buffing should solve that problem. However, having 2 of these 300 HP units on the same floor was a bit much. And unfortunately, we're losing Jeff to a sweeper on this round. Here's a heads up play I made. My Fel was overkilling the first enemy unit, so a lot of damage was being wasted. I could, however, advance a Steward to change the attack order and fly him back on the next turn. And that's exactly what I did. This saved me some damage on my Pyre. With all the adds out of the way, the boss was actually a heavy hitter. He was swinging for 58 times 2. One more swing and my Fel would have been dead. Luckily, I had just enough power to pull through. All in all, my Pyre went from 98 to 24 in this fight. Pretty brutal, but at least we didn't die. Okay, we're now at the final ring and we have a sizable chunk of gold. The Pyre remains were looking mighty tempting after a fight like that, and there was also a Merchant of Steel and trinkets. I finally hit the multi-strike I was looking for. Let's put it on the Shield Steward. Re-rolling the Trinket Merchant produced a Celestial Cascade. More Valor stacking is always going to be nice. Let's also take the Wing Steel for more draw. Back at the Merchant of Steel, the upgrades were not too useful, and Quick was actively detrimental, so let's just remove a card. We're now down to a 15 card deck. Okay, we've made it to the final battle. This Seraph puts 5 sap on whatever floor he's on and adds a curse to your deck. Luckily, the curse was largely ignorable if I was willing to take 3 Pyre damage. If I play the curse, it saps all my units for 4, which is way more of a downside than just taking the Pyre damage. Most of the units in this battle had spell shields. Fortunately, most of my damage was coming from units and not spells, so this wasn't a huge issue. There's also enemies that silence, but we can just ignore those. Because our deck doesn't care about spell shield, the enemies in this fight are actually notably less tanky than in the last fight, so Fel was making short work of everything. Thanks to all the Valor we've been stacking, Fel can take a beating and regenerate her armor back. This fight is also pretty damn long, so when Seraph finally got to our floor, Fel had a whopping 500 damage and armor. She made this fight look like an absolute joke. With a final punch, Guildmonger closes us out, and we finish the run with 33 Pyre health left. Not bad. Here's the run summary screen. If you want to see more content like this or want to suggest a challenge, please feel free to let me know. Thanks for watching.